Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's BCD Travel Talk. Today we'll have a discussion with airport representatives in the Benelux to check how are they dealing with COVID-19 and what they're doing to prepare themselves on the return of business travel. We are using Microsoft Teams live event. You can't speak up, but if you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the right top of your screen. We'll answer them at the end of this session. Welcome again, and let me hand over to today's moderator, Jelle Bamelis. Jelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Didi, and welcome everyone to this first episode of our new series of online events. My name is Jelle Bamelis. I'm a Senior Marketing Manager at BCD Travel, and I'm very happy and excited to be the moderator of today's session. Now, first a disclaimer. During today's event, we won't be throwing slide after slide at you, but rather hold an open and somewhat interactive conversation. It's also the reason why we sent you a link to a live poll in our reminder email this morning. So in case you haven't filled it out yet, we'll be sharing the link again in the chat here. So if you have a moment, give us your insight as well so we can use them during this talk. During the event, we also welcome your questions through the Q&A functionality in Teams. So as I mentioned before, no death by PowerPoint today, but just an open conversation about how airports are dealing with COVID-19, how they're preparing themselves for the return of business travel. So for this conversation, we've invited 3 representatives from the largest airports in our region. Unfortunately, one of the representatives had some technical difficulties, and we'll see if he is able to log in later in this call or not. It's René Steinhaus from Luxembourg Airport. But I'm very pleased to introduce 2 other representatives here, Annemarie van Hemert from Amsterdam Schiphol Airport and Leon Verhalle from Brussels Airport. So welcome to our speakers, and I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves quickly to the audience, starting with you, Annemarie.
Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Annemarie van Hemert. I work for Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, and I'm responsible. I'm the head of aviation business development.
And Leon?
Thank you for the introduction, Jelle. Yeah, Leon Verhalle, Director Aviation Development. With a team of 11 people, we are responsible for the information and communication to the travelers, to the travel trade, and to corporates, and also for the customer relationship management with more than 60 airlines at Brussels.
Excellent. I'm very excited to have you here today. Thanks for introducing yourself. And before I ask you the first question of today, I'd really like to show some insight as well that BCD Travel has gathered on business travel today. So we've sent out a survey end of last year to about 100 global travel managers and buyers. And the most striking trend we saw is that about 8 in 10 report that only essential travel is taking place today. It's also estimated that it'll take 3 to 5 years for travel to fully recover from the global pandemic. So we're seeing a lot of less bookings in our region, which also means that a lot of travelers haven't seen the inside. I know I haven't seen the inside of an airport since the start of the pandemic. So recently in the Belgian press, there was an article about the busiest weekend of the year, which is traditionally around Easter weekend. Brussels Airport, if I remember correctly, saw a decrease of about 79%. And I was wondering, Annemarie, do you see those same trends, numbers, figures happening at Schiphol Airport?
Yes, what we've seen is that there's obviously a slight change in the passengers mix. If we look at 2019, we had 32% of business passengers and 20% of visiting friends and relatives, 46% of leisure. And if you look at last year, the mix was already different with 33% business passengers, 29% of VFR and 35% of leisure, which means that the mix is slightly turning into more business, but also far more leisure oriented. If you look at the actual numbers for the passengers, if you look at the month of March last year, we had 2.5 million passengers, and the month of March this year, 2021, we had only 660,000 passengers. So you see a complete downfall in number of passengers, but unfortunately that obviously had to do with the pandemic.
Okay, wow. Is that something more similar that you see as well in Brussels Airport, Leon? Is that along the same lines, more or less?
Yeah, I think we all see that the recovery is still very limited in the first half of 2021. At the moment, we are running about 10 to 15% of our 2019 traffic. But we're quite lucky, since yesterday the non-essential travel ban has been lifted in Belgium. We were quite happy to see that on Monday morning some of the flights really were chock-a-block on departure. So there's definitely a sort of pent-up demand in the market. We expect that the situation will continue to improve during summer. We hope that during summer season we will be able to have around 50% of our traffic, and then hopefully going up to 75% of traffic closing into the winter season, and hopefully next year closer to 85%. However, and that's important, of course, for this webinar as well, we noted that business travel is lagging. People are going on holiday. People are especially going to visit their friends and family, their relatives. But since business travel is still lagging, especially with duty of care, the fact that you cannot really go out of Europe, we still note that the original 30% share of business travel that we had in Brussels is not back yet, and probably will be slower to recover than leisure and holiday traffic.
Absolutely. And if I'm not mistaken, René, looking at the past crises that we've got, we also noticed that leisure was always one of the first segments of tourism to recover during a big game changer. So, but again, those figures are very promising. And if I ask you, René, if you look forward, I know you don't have a crystal ball, of course, but if you look forward to next year, and if you look at the expectations for those travel movements, maybe end of this year, 2022, what is it that you see or can expect?
Yeah, that's the question for Annemarie or myself.
For you, Leon.
Okay. Especially
going for next year.
Yeah, for next year, we definitely hope that we will be able to cross the 85% 2019 figures again. But I think both IATA and ACI, the organization of airports, are all forecasting that the full recovery will only be in sight around 2024. But indeed, everybody's expecting that the holiday segment, the leisure segment, will be the first one to recover. Next to the VFR segment, people want to visit their friends and their family again. They want to cross the borders again and see those people that they have been looking for only through Zoom or Teams or Messenger for the past year. And for business traffic, I think we all know the segments. I think for the larger corporates, it will take a little bit longer. Essential travel already has been there. In Brussels, we noted the diplomats and the lobbyists and the military and the medics, and especially also seaman traffic. But the MICE traffic has not been there. It's not possible to go to a conference or to go to an event. But the entrepreneurs already have returned. We noted that the small and medium-sized enterprises, people that smell business, so to say, were the first to jump on a flight again and were visiting their clients again to have a face-to-face meeting. And hopefully this will also trigger the larger corporates to move further and to note that traffic will become safer and go to the skies again.
Absolutely. Leon, maybe I'll ask you one final question before I move back to Annemarie. What measures did you already take at the airport? I mean, a lot of people, they haven't been in the airport for like the past year. And I do believe that the passenger experience kind of changed as well, taking a flight. Looking at your airport, Brussels airport, is there anything specific that travelers need to take into account when going to the airport, for instance, especially since they haven't been for a very long time?
I think anything specific is not the case. The specific is the things that you already do at other locations in your country. We have what we call at Brussels the 3 golden rules. First of all, wear a face mask. Secondly, social distancing. And thirdly, of course, absolute hygiene. Wash your hands, use hand gel dispenser, use the hand wash units that we have at the airport. Of course, everywhere at the airport, the same as in the shops, you have the plexiglass screens, there's touchless payments, all those things you see at other locations that you visit as a consumer. One specific thing which I think is different from an airport, from the shops, is what we call queue management. And we have to make sure that the passenger flows, especially in peak hours, are well organized. When you go through check-in, security, seating, the boarding process, returning, going through immigration, waiting for your bag at the baggage reclaim, it all requires excellently managed queue management. So we have a lot of people in those nice kiwi shirts, those fluid, green shirts that make sure that people maintain the social distancing and that queue management is optimized.
We'll come back on that later, René, because I'm just wondering, how about, because now you're at less travelers, if an airport has to scale up again, that poses, of course, another challenge. When you increase the number of passengers, you cannot just increase the surface of your airport, I assume. So, but we'll get back to that in later. I'd just like to ask Annemarie now, what's the traveler experience? How has that changed at Schiphol Airport?
Well, to be honest, I think it's a sort of duplication as what Leon just told us. It's the same, you know, also for our airport, the same measures apply as the rest of the Netherlands and the other airports. So keeping the distance, washing your hands, wearing a face mask is nothing, I was always going to say it's nothing new anymore because we're getting so used to it. What we've done is that we also realize that not all travelers are always aware about the specific measures. So we also put a lot of signs in place and stickers on the floors to remind them of the social distancing, as well as that Schiphol employees walk around and also kindly request people to keep their distance, specifically in the more busy areas such as the check-in areas. We've also organized sanitizing zones, which allows passengers to disinfect their personal belongings where needed. We also have the vending machines throughout the airport where you can buy the face mask in case you have forgotten it. And also, like Leon also indicated, the transparent screens. We also do extra disinfection around areas which are frequently used, like toilet groups, check-in desk and waiting rooms. So it's more like of the same. And if you look further ahead, as all the airports around us, we're also preparing ourselves for hopefully a flourishing summer, whereby we get some travelers back again, and mostly the leisure travelers. Our main concern will be the social distancing, that in itself, because of the higher numbers we're expecting. That's going to be our main challenge, specifically during the peak times. So that's the type of conversation we're having with the airlines, but also with the representatives of the government, because obviously we need to, obey these rules, but it also needs, in the end, to be a workable situation. So we're still negotiating.
Okay. In the meantime, let's have a look at what our audience thinks, because we've also asked them the question about the measures at the airport and asked them to rank the most important, where they think they need more, what can still improve for the airport. So if you look at our recent survey, this is the answers from our attendees today, looking at communication about the measures. Now, I think I can easily repeat René's golden top three, really like that one, the face mask, the social distancing, all keeping that in mind. The top four, check-in procedure, for instance. A lot of travelers might be still worried about how that goes, and I'll ask a question about that in a moment. Security and passport controls, I mean, we saw some photos on social media as well, people queuing up, and I think, Leon, you've covered that. Queue management, very important, especially moving forward, and also the testing facilities at the airport. I think we made a good call, because that will be our next questions, basically. For instance, René, Leon, I'm gonna go back to you in this case. Check-in counters, for instance, it's usually where the trip begins for a lot of travelers. They check in their luggage. Are you pushing for like more self-check-in possibilities, etc., in order to maximize that social distancing, eliminating the contact between the traveler and maybe the people sitting behind the desk?
Indeed, I think online check-in already has become is already used by the majority of passengers. Online check-in has become popular, and even with your self-baggage check-in when you've done your online check-in. So that's the way to go. However, when you have to use a check-in desk, first of all, we have been successful, especially in the first months of the crisis, to separate check-in desks, so to have one empty desk in a row before the next desk is being used. But of course, when the people start to return, you don't have this luxury anymore, and it all comes back then again on queue management and making sure that you have these nice waiting queues, the snake lines, and to maintain a distance there, because at the moment, of course, the check-in desks are, well, at least 1.5 meter apart, and the use of the plexiglass screens also guarantees the separation of check-in staff and the passenger, which gives a comfortable feeling for both sides. Because let's not forget that it's not only the passenger, it's also the airport staff that is facing so many travelers during the day.
Absolutely. So an added enhancement at Brussels Airport would be a little bit like Disneyland with the snake lines, etc. I'm joking, of course, but
without the waiting lines, I hope.
Without the waiting line, let's hope. Absolutely. Annemarie, is that the same thing you see at Schiphol Airport? And maybe Leon also touched on that scaling up of the airport, especially during the summer. But is that the same in Schiphol Airport? The check-in procedures, focusing more on those self-check-in solutions.
Yeah, we already have many airlines who actually have that as a standard procedure, so that doesn't require any different processes. But we also have, for example, some of the more like the home carriers who tend to have a desire to actually see their passengers before they take the flight, so have the sort of so-called old-fashioned check-in process. Yes, and that in itself is quite a challenge. So also we apply the same, is that we use every other desk. So we try to separate the queues from one queue to the other queue. We put a lot of emphasis on, how do you say that, managing the queues. So by putting staff in the same area and trying to guide the passengers and manage the flows as good as we can. But then again, this is just practice for the actually the peak moments in the summer. So that's going to be the real challenge. So everything and everyone is focused on the model that we need to apply then. And that's only in a couple of months' time. So
maybe adding to what Annemarie is saying, I think all the airports are really doing their best. Unfortunately, when there is a problem, just for 50 minutes on a busy day, there are always people taking pictures and throwing this on social media, which is then suddenly giving the complete wrong perception of what is happening. Because yes, it can go wrong for 10 or 15 minutes, but it immediately hits the press and everybody is just forwarding these messages that the airport is making a mess of it, which I think both Annemarie and myself can say this is not the case at both airports.
Yeah, it's a bit of a skewed perspective, especially pointing out those pain points, etc. Moments that things might go haywire are just that specific moment, doesn't tell you anything else about how your day is going. Maybe about Annemarie, you talked about those flows inside the airport. A lot of business travelers still are thinking about separation between business travelers, leisure travelers, breaking up those flows, because it is true that the needs of a business traveler are very different to those of a leisure traveler. Is that possible actually at all at the airport, or are you doing anything with those with that idea?
Well, in itself, I was always going to say, well, anything is possible, but it has limitations, obviously. What we do have, and for many years actually, we've got the premium lounge concept, premium membership. So business travelers tend to make use of that, but also the frequent flyers. Which means that if you are a premium member, you have access to priority lane at the security check, and by using your iris scan, for example, you pass the passport control a lot quicker in about 10 seconds. But it also involves priority parking and business class check-in lane. So there is a specific program which allows you, if you're a member, to be segregated from the other type of passengers. But other than that, it's quite impossible to do that, because simply due to the lack of floor space. It's certainly during a peak time, we do have separate, depending on the airlines, we do have separate areas for check-in for business class passengers. But other than that, you end up in a security area where everyone is equal and everyone sort of stands in the same queue. Well, hopefully a short queue, but at least you're being at the same area where there's no segregation anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The same goes for the passport control as well. So no, we do that through this program, which is there for many years, and we do expect that in the uplift for increase of number of flights that passengers, frequent travelers and business travelers tend to make use of this program in future a lot more. But other than that, we don't have any specific arrangements.
Okay, and looking at Brussels Airport, I personally know that there's a fast lane access for business travel passengers, but Leon, is there anything you'd like to add on that? Coming back on Annemarie's comments, how is the situation in Brussels Airport?
Yeah, I think like Annemarie is saying, for check-in, of course, there's always a separation when you have a business class check-in or an economy check-in, so the lines can be shorter when you're lucky to use the business class check-in, either on your seat allocation or based on your frequent flyer card. Yeah, we have the fast lane for which you can buy access on our website, or it has been allocated through the airline. But then, of course, the difference disappears. You can go to a lounge as a business traveler, as a non-business traveler, you cannot, or you buy access. But I think also what Annemarie is saying, the difference between business and leisure is becoming more blurred. I think low-cost business is using the same flow as the leisure traveler. And we also see a growing number of premium leisure travelers that are using business facilities. So this strict separation is becoming more and more mixed, and the airports are doing their best to give separation where it is possible, but it's only a part of the whole process.
Absolutely. And Leon, while you're on screen, can you imagine? So we've been the measurements that have been taken sometimes, especially with the guidelines, the laws that people have been getting, especially when it comes to self-testing or the testing, the PCR tests, etc. How is the situation today? Do you need to present a negative PCR test when you enter the airport building? Do you need to show proof? Proof of a vaccination? I don't think that's already the case, but especially with the testing, how is that being checked at Brussels Airport today?
I think as an airport, you are not in a legal position to ask for this test or to forbid someone entering without a test. It's more when you check in for the airline that the airline can forbid you to board the flight, either during the check-in process or or during the boarding process. I mean, we have a sort of public area. It's accessible for everyone. We can only stop people when it is busy. For example, as from today, we will not allow meeters and greeters anymore in the arrival zone because we expect that with the growth of traffic, it might become too busy. But we will not be able to separate flows by people that are tested or not tested. We also, you may remember, we had a sort of temperature screening last year. Also, we stopped it because, first of all, the indication was not always reliable. And secondly, we thought it was giving the wrong impression that we are closing off a zone, which by definition should be accessible for everyone. And we cannot separate tested or non-tested people or vaccinated or non-vaccinated people.
Mm-hmm. Do you still have test facilities in the airport building, for instance, where people can take a test?
Yes, we have the COVID test center on departure level, very busy and very successful, used by a lot of people that are going to take a flight. Mm-hmm. The same for testing on arrival, which is mainly used by Belgians returning to Belgium and already taking a test upon arrival before they go home, but also, of course, for foreign visitors that have to get a test before they continue their journey into the country. Looking into the Belgian regulation at the moment, you have to take a test at day 1 and a test at day 7. There's 10 days of quarantine, except when your second test is negative, and then you are allowed to leave quarantine after 7 days. And this is the case for all countries except those countries which are green or orange, according to the Belgian definition.
Okay, and Annemarie, looking at Schiphol Airport, is that the same situation there? Do you have test facilities available? Are travelers? Is there a kind of check on whether travelers have done a test or isn't that the case?
Yeah, no, we have no facilities. Now, of course, we also needed to offer something to the passengers. And what Leon is saying is right, is that we do have a different legal position. So we are doing on behalf of the airlines, we do some checks. So First of all, we urge the passengers to be tested off airport because that saves a lot of time for the passengers itself, but also a lot of hassle in the flows at the airport. But in case that they haven't done it or weren't able to do it beforehand, they have the possibility to take a rapid test at the departure lounge, which works because they can actually pre-book it on the date and time, etc. And just bearing in mind that the test results need to not be older than the 24 hours before you take the flight, of course. And then if you have the negative result, that's fine, because then you can travel. But you do have to, you need to be able to show the declaration of the negative test results. And in case of a positive result, you're obviously not allowed to travel, which means that you have to automatically go into quarantine for 10 days. We do have some initiatives to make it easier or to do more COVID safe journey at Schiphol, where we had a trial for the Atlanta travel corridor, where passengers had to test negative for the COVID test, but allowing them to enter without having to comply with the country's 10 days quarantine advisory. We do have specific test facilities for transfer passengers to China. And we had 2 weeks ago, we had, maybe you've heard that also in the press, we had a test flight going to Rhodos, whereby the passengers sort of traveled in so-called, what we call the bubble. We created a bubble at the airport and in the flight, and they stayed together as like a sort of communion, I would say. And also arriving at Rhodos, they can only stay on the premises of the hotel. I'm not sure how exciting that is, but at least we had a lot of passengers trying to get on this flight. So it seems to be a success, and in a month's time we will do this again to Gran Canaria. So I believe we've got many thousands of people who would like to join this flight, but this is just meant to be as an experience to find out if there's a model to travel in a secure and safe way, during the phases whereby everyone is rolling out the vaccine programs. So it's at least something. And obviously, last but not least, we also have testing facilities for staff, which is also quite important.
Absolutely. I actually read that article, Anna-Marie, about those test flights, and I'm really hoping for them to come to Belgium, because I think it'll be an equal success. I could spend a week or two in Rhodos or wherever.
Yes,
so,
I can imagine.
No, and I think that also is very promising looking forward, that a lot of people, especially being locked down in these situations, really look forward to some time abroad. So I think for us as an industry, that looks very, very promising. Anna-Marie, can I ask you another thing? I was wondering, you see that the trip, the business trip, often doesn't start at the airport, but actually from home, where people leave their homes. And I know that airports are also looking into the way travelers are making it to the airports. We see that public transportation sometimes has been a bit doubtful. People are just wondering, how I'm not going to sit on a train with hundreds of people, etc. Is that something that you see at Schiphol Airport as well? The way how people are coming to the airport? Is there more? Do I have to reserve parking well in advance? Are those still available, etc.?
Yeah, now that's still available. Is the pre-parking facilities. The trains in general, because we tend to be people who like to travel by public transportation, but as you're sitting quite close to the other passengers on board of a train, it's not that popular, I would say. We still have the generic rules here in place, whereby without a valid boarding pass, you're not welcome in the terminal. So just to keep the total amount of numbers of people as low as possible. So therefore we do ask the friends and family to stay at the kiss and ride area. Obviously this doesn't sound really COVID proof, but that's where we ask family to stay and wait for the passengers. And any specific data on actual arrival of the passenger, how they get to the airport, we don't have that. But this is just a generic view, is that people tend, in generic view, they tend to use the car a lot more to park, because then you can stay away from other passengers rather than taking the train, which normally used to be, a hassle-free type of transportation.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'd like to focus you for a moment back on one of our surveys we did at BCD Travel, looking at the business traveler needs and also the needs from the travel manager. We've asked our in the same survey, asked our travel managers what are the biggest program priorities, and we do specifically see duty of care, traveler satisfaction. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, and traveler well-being being very important these days. And that also brings us to the question of security at the airports, for instance. We know airports have a rigorous security procedure to safeguard the safety of the passengers. How is the social distancing being managed? And I'd like to ask Leon from Brussels Airport that question. How is, because this tends to be a high touch, let's call it, area where sometimes you need to be searched or whatever, searched may be too harsh. But how do you safeguard that social distance at those places?
I hope it didn't happen too many times too harsh, Jelle. It's the usual measures like you see overall at the airport, but then more intense. First of all, it's not only the face masks, it's also the face shields that you see with the security staff, which is in close contact with the passenger. Of course, gloves everywhere, which are frequently being replaced. And another key factor is the frequent disinfection of all the material, including the trays. So we use cleaning, UV cleaning, everything what is available. And finally, also the social distancing. Again, when you're waiting in line, make sure that you have enough airport staff, enough airport crew available, that the waiting lines are stretched, and that you indeed maintain the 1.5 meter distance. But experience shows that even though people get closer to each other during the security process, nobody really has been complaining about it. We didn't note any issues that have been raised because a lot of people in the meantime have gone through the security process.
Is that the same at Schiphol Airport, Annemarie? The security, like the UV disinfected areas, etc.
Yes, it's the same. So it almost sounds like a copy of Brussels, but it's no surprise in reality, because security obviously is a service that needs to be carried out. So we do the utmost, like other airports as well, is to make it according to the new rules, but still make it operational. So it means that indeed sanitizing, wearing face masks, wearing the gloves, and it's only in case of the alarm goes off with the security scan that people need to be searched. Other than that, it's a much higher rate, obviously, that passes the security scan, and there's no problem at all. So no coming closer to the passenger is needed there. It's only when the alarm goes off, and then they stay within the 1.5 meters, obviously.
Mm-hmm. So you pass the security checks, you traditionally end up in the boarding area where you have all the gates, etc. Again, I assume with the queue management, you're working on the shops. They have the plexi glass. Is there anything specific that travelers should take into account when they're visiting that boarding area, or even during the boarding process? And I'm going to ask that to Leon. How is that experience from a traveler perspective?
I think first of all, they will see the airport is still rather empty, so a lot of space available. Also the boarding areas, of course, have the same separation with the seats. 1 out of 2 or 3 seats is only available for seating. The same goes for the food and beverage outlets. You still notice that quite a number of outlets are closed, especially the bar areas. Luckily, we're still able to offer table seating in some of the restaurant facilities, at least those that are open, although in combination with self-service. And that's very different from the country itself. All the restaurants are closed. You cannot go in. We are quite happy that from an airport viewpoint, we are able to offer table seating when you are beyond security. So not in the departure area, but you can find a table to sit there, relax, and wait for your flight after security. So that's, I think, one of the main differences that you will notice.
Mm-hmm. And Annemarie, is that the same at Schiphol Airport? How about the restaurants there, the table seating? Is there a place where travelers can just grab a drink, or I assume so?
Yeah, well, in Amsterdam, it's a lot better than Brussels. No, we do have some differences. Obviously, the underlying reason is more or less the same. So, which means that if you have the public area before security, it's all closed. All eating and drinking facilities are closed, just like the rest of Holland. Only the essential shops tend to be open, so the grocery stores, drugstores, etc., and financial points. You can do the order and collect service, so you can sort of pre-order it, and within a time frame of 4 hours you can collect it, so you can still take it on your flight if you like. And if you go into the restricted areas, so after security, we have limited food and beverage outlets open with seating arrangements, so that's more or less the same. But here again, that's also, you can place, if you go to the shops, you can also place an order directly at the store, so that's more or less the same what we have in the rest of Holland. You can sort of what we call click and collect. You order it and you collect it, and in this case, it's in obviously because of the flight time. It's your departure time. It's in a shorter time frame. There is, however, something that's really not less exciting within the airport, is that also at the airport we need to, just like the rest of Holland, we need to comply to the curfew hours, which means that all shops are closed between 9:45 p.m. and 4:30 a.m. And besides that, and that's the really sad story, is that we have an alcohol ban at Schiphol between 8 o'clock a.m. and 7 o'clock a.m. So then between those hours you're not allowed to buy and or consume any alcohol at the airport. So there you go. That was a bit depressing, but hopefully in better times we'll get back to that.
Absolutely.
Maybe to add to Anne-Marie about those two things where Brussels maybe is better than Amsterdam. First of all, we have our takeaway Starbucks, which is open in the departure hall. So that's an important one before security. And secondly, indeed, our shops are open. Unfortunately, not all, simply because some shops cannot make money with such a small number of passengers. But they're open during regular business hours, although at some days or hours they also close down because simply the number of people is still limited.
All right. Before
anyhow,
we go,
the Belgian beer is always better than Heineken. So it's
okay.
Yeah, I understand.
Before, you have a mixed audience. I didn't include that one in the questions. I think we're gonna, before we go down that road of comparison, I think we've had a nice conversation. I'm out of questions. I do want to look through some questions we got in the Q&A from our participants. But first of all, I'd like to show you the second question we asked our attendees today, and that was, when do they expect business travel to return? So if we can have a look at the results on that question, and you'll see that it's very promising, that more than half, I mean, the majority expect business travel to return in September 2021. I don't know about you, René, Leon, and Anne-Marie, but that looks very promising to me.
It looks very promising, but I have to say that I'm a bit more critical. I do see that everyone is sort of staggering and waiting and participating to go on a flight for personal reasons, so for the VFR or the leisure reasons, and that companies maybe may take different decisions in terms of money-wise, because they've seen, you know, in a year, more than a year, that conference calls also have the results, and that they would like to invest in different things, but we'll see.
Okay. I think it's the regular picture that you see indeed after the summer, when the vaccination programs are finalized, that also business travel is returning. However, some companies will also have to look into the financial limitations, budget cuts, that also will have an impact on travel for 2022.
Excellent. Let's have a look at the questions we got from our attendees as well. First of all, we got a question about, we have the checks on the negative tests, of course, at the airport, but looking, for instance, at Brussels airport, and especially with the whole vaccination passport in place. I know it's a little bit too early, but are you also expecting at your airports, and I'll start with Brussels airport, with vaccination checks at the airport, in addition to those negative tests checks?
I think it's a little bit too early to ask such a question, because a vaccination is not an allowance to travel. It's not a passport. It's not a sort of legal check that allows you to travel. And I think we're all waiting for the European Commission to come up with a proposal for their so-called green pass or e-health certificate, how this will work. I think when you are good in photoshopping, you can make your vaccination certificate yourself. And I think that's the biggest issue for the next 3 months. How are we going to organize as an industry these vaccination passports? But also, how do we avoid that people that have not been vaccinated yet can use a test system before the flight or after flight to be allowed access to the same kind of destination, to the same kind of travel. So these are the big question marks that we have to solve. The vaccination speed is on. We're all looking forward, but how are we going to organize and make sure that vaccination and testing has a legal base so that we can indeed restart again?
Yeah, that's the first requirement, of course, and I assume, Anna-Marie, it's the same at the Schiphol.
Yeah. I can agree. It's still not sure officialized, and besides that, it needs to become a safe document whereby it's completely how to say, copy free, that you can't mess with the results. So I can imagine that for a long time from now, we still need to have it double ways, 2 ways. So and have a green pass just to indicate that you have been vaccinated, but also do the extra testing. So I can't imagine that for this year, at least, that we will eliminate the testing facilities at the airport. We still need them. Besides the fact that I also hear people around me that not everyone is convinced to get vaccination. So there will also be some kind of percentage whereby people will travel without the vaccination, but need to prove that they're not, they don't have COVID, signs of COVID in their body.
What we see today is that within Western Europe, there's a much more cautious approach to vaccination passports than in Southern Europe. I think we all see that Greece already starts to welcome passengers that can show that they have been vaccinated, because it will save the tourism industry. It's different in Western Europe, where tourism is less key for a successful economy than in Southern Europe.
Okay.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you for that valuable information. I see that the rest of the Q&A questions more or less came in your answers as well that you've given throughout the presentation, so I won't be going into those. The only thing I'd like to do today is thank you for your time, Leon and Anna-Marie. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues with one of our speakers, so we don't have the full picture at Luxembourg Airport today. And I also probably mixed up your name, Leon, a couple of times with that of Renee, so I apologize for that. What I'd like to say to our attendees as well is thank you very much for joining this session. We'll make sure that the recording will be sent to you via email. Please share it with your colleagues or your peers that might find it interesting. And I'm also very excited to announce that our next session will be held on May 18th and will focus on sustainability and business travel. So thank you all very much. We look forward to seeing you again at our next online event, and I wish you a great rest of your day. Goodbye.